live from
the Parrot room.
Does it always flap its wings like that? Or is that a new
I always
feature
flap
we've
my
added?
wings.
I always flap my wings.
Apparently so. I hadn't even noticed that. Well, we get less attention.
I gotta be me.
I gotta be me.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bird. Let's see. So how are you, Mickey?
I'm pretty good. I'm on the glycemic cycle, though. I'm eating some sugary treats here.
You know, I did just the opposite just now. I had some smoked salmon and cheese.
That's pretty exciting. So I thought we did okay. They better start a war in Ukraine soon because we're going to run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. I've about exhausted my vast repertoire of knowledge about Ukraine.
The post office reform bill before the Congress.
There are a host of fascinating policy questions that I'm afraid I am not up to speed on. So we'll have to talk about something else.
Yeah. I looked up the lyrics to Convoy.
Oh, good.
And it is apolitical.
That's what I thought.
But it's very Trumpy. It's like they leave Los Angeles. There are these two trucks, Pigpen and some other guy.
And is there a line? And is there a line? Looks like we got us a convoy.
There's definitely that line. And they pick up, and they sort of like, and they're out for bear, and the bears are trying to stop them, and the
bears are the cops, right?
The bears are the cops, and they even have a bear. Yeah. They have a bear in the air, and they got themselves a convoy, and the bears really try to stop them in Chicago, and they fail, and then they make it to New Jersey, where it ends, and they all go back home. And but it's like it's a demonstration of power, and it's sort of exciting, which may explain like a lot of what's going on with this convoy. But it's apolitical unless you like police. It's sort of fuck the police. They're trying to stop us from speeding.
Well, that was definitely the idea. You know, speaking of music, popular music, I had a dream about you 2 nights ago, Mickey.
I don't think I want to know about this. Oh, that's one other thing, by the way. You can't call somebody, you can't say 10-4 good buddy, because that, according to the glossary, now means you're accusing them of being a homosexual.
Really?
Who knew?
Oh my God, that explains so many interactions I've had recently.
There's
all
that
the raised eyebrows.
That last thing at the truck stop was you barely escaped.
That was like I said. Yeah, she said Gestapo soup, and I said 10-4, good buddy, and she just looked at me like I was. So no, you don't want to hear about the dream?
Yeah, no, I do want to hear about the dream, of course.
Well, I'll just tell you the part that's. That was really captured a part of you. It was like I was at this party that you were holding, and you had been complaining about my performance in a certain respect that I won't get into, my performance at the party. But then there was this moment where you had invited, you were hoping that some rock star would come. And I don't know if it was, I don't remember if it was like David Byrne or Bruce Springsteen or what. But whoever it was, you said like
P.A. Frank.
No, you said like,
you know, he was a rock star.
Who? Yeah, the Thomas, one of the Thomas Franks.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Continue with the dream.
Anyway, it was just that you said, I think that's the sound of David Byrne's car. It's just interesting that it captured 2 of your obsessions: your knowledge of popular rock music, and your knowledge of cars. That's just an interesting little touch in my dream.
Okay. And that's
it? That's 50% of the dream. Yeah.
Was he behind the wheel of a large automobile?
We never saw. I just think it's interesting the way dreams work, the way your unconscious mind works. It just semi-randomly combines shit and makes connections.
Are you saying that the real meaning of the dream is that I am pining for celebrity content?
You know, I hadn't seen it as deeply as I now see I should have seen it. That was really deep, Mickey. But I don't do a Freudian take on dreams, although The question is interesting. Why do we cloak? Like in the other part of the dream that I'm not talking about, there was somebody who in retrospect clearly stands for somebody in real life. But in the dream, their identity was cloaked. It was just like a generic. It was just like a generic.
Was I in the second part of the dream?
Was what?
The part of the dream you're keeping secret from us. Was I?
That was the first part of the dream. Well, the whole thing was I was at your party.
Okay.
I was at a party held by Mickey, and you were being, this kind of obsessive Mickey party host who wants everything to go right. And you were complaining about how I was interacting with a guest, and the actual real life identity of the guest is clear in retrospect, but was cloaked in the dream. My point is the reason that it's hard to completely dismiss Freud's approach to interpreting dreams is there is this weird thing where things are symbolically cloaked sometimes, right? Like in retrospect, it's clear that this thing stood for that thing. Well, then why didn't you just dream about that thing? Why are these things cloaked in symbolism or fake identities or whatever, right? Why is that? We don't know.
I've had some of those dreams. But
the other part, I think, is just the part about you saying is that that sounds like David Byrne's car is, I do think in dreams you make semi-random connections. And that's a lot of how creativity works, I think. And then there's a filtering process that just lets the relatively fruitful connections come into your conscious mind, I think.
That makes it all sound much more rational than I suspect it is.
Creativity?
But no, the connection of dreams to creativity and this editor you've proposed. But anyway, I had some really horrible dreams when I had a medical scare.
But you always have a medical scare.
They were all no, I don't. They were all completely cloaked.
So it was
kind of obvious.
They all represented fatal disease, but in the dreams they were cloaked as what?
Well, I don't know. Like I was in a restaurant with the turnstile, and my father was ahead who had died.
Right.
And I was.
You were about to walk through the turnstile.
I was walking through the turnstile, and my father was saying, "Why are my mother and my brother staying behind?" Seemed not very subtle.
He said, "Why are my mother and brother staying behind?"
You said, "Why are they staying behind?" Pointing to my mother and my brother who were still alive. So,
but wait, that doesn't make sense because
it was a Chinese restaurant. What?
But that doesn't make sense, right? So, because in the dream, wait, you and your mother and your brother have not yet passed through the turnstile?
They're staying behind. I was going through.
But that doesn't make sense because your mother had already died.
No, she hadn't.
Oh, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example. Why that the meaning is obvious, probably, and why would your mind cloak it like that? That's the question Freud asked. I don't have a great answer.
Did he?
Well, his whole technique was premised on the idea that the reason was I don't know that much Freud, but he posited a reason, and it was that your unconscious mind wants to protect you from knowing X, Y. He had some kind of the point is he had some theory about the cloaking, and that seemed to legitimize psychotherapy.
Well, there's definitely an unconscious mind. Your book can.
Oh, we know that, but he wasn't original there. Nietzsche beat him to that, among other people.
Huh. I didn't know that.
I think even he acknowledged some inspiration from.
I thought he refused to read Nietzsche because he knew that it was all there, or parts of it were all there.
Maybe you know more than I do.
I don't know.
We have a noted psychologist who purports to listen to the Parrot Room.
Well, I want to know: do any? Supposedly truckers are very well informed because they have nothing. They have things to do, and increasingly things to do, but they have a lot of time to listen to the radio and podcasts. So, if any truckers actually listen to the Parrot Room, we'd love to hear from you. good buddy.
There is a roofer, Dave the roofer. Last check was a listener, but he's not a trucker. He's a roofer.
And we know what that means. So
10-4, good buddy. No, what does it mean?
I don't know what it means. So Vladimir Putin supposedly told this joke to Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it here because Zelensky was complaining about the Minsk Accords, which I guess Ukraine signed, but now doesn't like. I guess because they give too much power to Eastern Ukraine, too much independent power.
That would be a reason. I think they may, in effect, give Eastern Ukraine the right to veto a decision to do something like join NATO. I'm not sure. But go ahead.
And Putin said, whether you like it or not, or don't like it, bear with it, my beauty. Which was taken.
That was a reference to what?
It was taken to mean, when rape is inevitable. But then it was interpreted as something more than that, as a reference to a rock song by a group called Red Mold. Not such a good band name. Which the lyrics are, sleeping beauty in a coffin, I crept up and fucked her. Like it or dislike it, sleep, my beauty. That's a little cruder. And of course, why would Putin listen to a rock group called Red Mold? That makes no sense. So they denied it and said he was just referring to folktales.
Is it a Russian group?
Yeah. Red Mold, that's the red. Anyway, but the lyrics directly imply rape and necrophilia. But he said he was talking to the Kremlin said he was referring to folktales. And I wonder what kind of folktales they were.
There's some pretty grim folktales.
I guess that's right.
That's why they call them Grims. Huh.
10-4, good buddy.
There was an interesting theory. We're eventually going to talk to evolutionary psychology, but Martin Daly and Margot Wilson had this way of explaining the texture of folktales by reference to who was telling them. And so the wicked stepmother motif, they said, look, who is it who tells folk tales to kids? It's mothers, right? It's mothers don't like stepmothers. Stepmothers start out as mistresses. It's
was there that much divorce in the Grimm's time?
Well, I think there's been a fair amount of spouse displacement throughout recorded history. But anyway, I don't know the details, but it was very cleverly done, their approach to explaining themes. And
somebody should do the Beverly Hills version of Grimm's folktales. The wicked personal shopper, that sort of thing.
The wicked pool boy. What's your pool boy's name, Mickey? Is it Hector, your pool boy?
Who was it who had the pool boy? Billy Graham's son had a pool boy. But I forget what his name was.
I don't know. And then there's what do they call Cato Kalin's job description? Not pool boy, but he was O.J. Simpson's. Pool boy.
He was a house something, I think.
By the way, this is, I don't know. I don't know how many people we have who care about the O.J. Simpson murder trial, but I won't get into it. Never mind. We don't have enough.
You saw that the Atlantic was so stung by the criticism of it as constantly apocalyptic. They've put out a special happy issue.
Who criticized it as apocalyptic? You?
There was a big article in commentary that got taken up by me and a lot of people, more people than me. I was late to the party, and said it was Eeyore meets Nietzsche. That was the key line. But now they're happy. Happy.
Like a physical issue of the magazine, a whole happy physical issue?
It's like all a bunch of Arthur Brooks bullshit about how to be happy. Yeah, I think.
He's an interesting case.
He is?
Well, just because he was president of the American Enterprise Institute, and how many of those people kind of go the become self-help gurus or clearly have that aspiration, you know?
He's one of the great con men of our time. I immediately reacted badly to his TED Talk. He was obviously full of himself.
What was it about?
I think it involved capitalism being successful and greater immigration. So it was laying the groundwork I could tell it was laying the groundwork for comprehensive immigration reform. But he was just full of himself, and it was sort of ridiculous. And he somehow managed to get NPR gigs, and I think he has a Harvard professorship.
For a while, he was all over the New York Times. He was, a couple of years ago, a few years ago.
I don't know. I mean, he probably has some wisdom to dispense, but couldn't have that much wisdom to dispense. And he is a model for like a guy who leaves a think tank presidency and launches a whole new career. And when does that ever happen?
Yeah, and like I said, when is it self-help? You know, it's weird. He just doesn't fit the mold.
I guess.
But I agree. I mean, it's a. What is it about Brooks's and the New York Times? They all want to be self-help gurus. David, Arthur, all of them, the whole group.
The one who's Barbara Ehrenreich's daughter,
Rosa. She does not want to be a self-help guru.
But I think she's in the New York Times, isn't she?
Not regularly. She is a Georgetown Law. She appears on this. She is the least blobby regular on this blobby podcast called Deep State Radio, spearheaded by David Rothkopf, formerly editor of Foreign Policy. You know, she's good. She's funny, smart. Her mother is funny, smart.
Her mother is funny, smart. I called her a liar in my book. Didn't fit your definition of a lie.
It wasn't intentional?
No, but it was reckless disregard for the truth.
That's what you should have said. You should have called her reckless disregarder of the truth.
That's my definition of lie.
Speaking of which, so the James Bennett thing. So this libel trial, Sarah Palin suing the New York Times. Did you? We mentioned it briefly in the regular podcast. Did you see the actual line from the? Have you read the actual passage that he?
No.
So, well, let me read it to you. Here is how it appeared, and you tell me if you think there's any defensible interpretation. They wrote as edited by him. In 2011, when Jared Lee Loughner opened fire in a supermarket parking lot, grievously wounding Representative Gabby Giffords and killing 6 people, including a 9-year-old girl, the link to political incitement was clear. Before the shooting, Sarah Palin's Political Action Committee circulated a map of targeted electoral districts that put Ms. Giffords and 19 other Democrats under stylized crosshairs. He's the one who inserted the link to political incitement was clear. Does it seem to you that the only reasonable interpretation of that is to establish a causal link between Sarah Palin's map and the shooting of Gabby Giffords?
It's pretty bad. Yeah.
It's pretty bad. I mean,
it's sort of, you'd have to like really stretch it to defend that.
I don't think he is. I think he said, look, I made a mistake. It was my mistake. I think he says he didn't mean that. I find that conceivable just because he was working under something that probably fewer people experience these days, even journalists, and many people have never experienced, which is the pressure of an absolutely ironclad deadline. New York Times, it was a physical newspaper. It's got to come out. The editorial has to be done by now. He was working.
I wrote editorials for a physical newspaper.
Well, of course, but if you're right up against them, you might fuck up. I mean, if they're like, okay, we got to have this in 45 seconds, and you're typing, Mistakes can happen.
Mine was the LA Herald Examiner. Nobody would have noticed if I fucked up.
You probably did. You probably fucked up all the time, and nobody ever pointed it out to you because nobody was reading it.
I don't think I ever fucked up that bad, but I only had one editorial to write a day, and Bennett has to oversee 8 of them, or 3 of them. So
well, and more as the internet advanced, they were running tons of things a day.
Anyway, but like I said, he was just. It was like every article in the New York Times had to trash Trump. So if it was an article about bad rock and roll, it had to say this was Trump's fault somehow. So he was just trying to make an obvious occasion for saying, well, gee, Democrats could be violent too. Blame that somehow on Republicans. But
wait, it wasn't a Democrat who was violent here, right?
No, it was after the shooting at the softball game. It was after the Steve Scalise
that's
shooting.
Right.
They were lifting heaven and earth to blame that one on Republicans, and they did. I wonder if Palin will actually win this. That would be bad.
You wouldn't think so, because the thing that happened is they got blowback right away and issued a correction right away and said, we got it wrong. I mean, they didn't. What do you want? I mean,
did they say right away there was no link? Or I
haven't read the correction, but
the gun sites reporting at the districts, not the candidates.
I don't know, but there was an acknowledgement of error. I mean, God, there have been cases where they just, dig their heels in.
I guess
we will see.
Anyway, it's admirable that he took responsibility for it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, does that get the Times off the hook? No, it doesn't. He's their employee. The Times is still live.
I don't think that helps. I just think it helps with the jury's psychology.
Yeah.
It's like this guy's, he's admitting error.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, what does he care if they get saddled with a $7 billion settlement?
Right. He should, they did violate the rule of libel suits, which is you never fire the guy who's going to be the main witness at the libel trial. You keep him close. And they didn't do that with Bennett. They unfairly fired Bennett.
But this wasn't the reason for the firing.
Right. But why shouldn't he? What the Times fucked him over. Why shouldn't he turn around and say, okay, buddy, you're going to get a $20 million judgment against you. Here goes.
Right.
So the answer is 2 reasons, 3 reasons.
He's an honorable person.
He's an honorable person. He wants another job in the industry, and his brother is a senator.
His brother is a senator.
So 3 reasons to be responsible. So I guess I should do my, as long as we're on the free speech topic, and maybe you had some questions about corporatism, and I guess I thought more about what we talked about last week, and the thing is, there's the First Amendment, which applies to the government regulating speech. There's non-First Amendment, which is private corporations and private people regulating speech on their sites and in their lives. But there is a middle ground, which is the corporatist middle ground, which is a really big corporation, so big that it's come to the government's attention, and the government subtly exercises Putin-like influence over the corporation. So it doesn't explicitly say anything, but the corporation has to always worry about offending the powers that be, because at any moment they could come down on them. And the corporation knows that the thing to do is to kick Joe Rogan off the air, because Joe Biden will be pleased, and Joe Biden will not then try to break them up on antitrust grounds. And that is a middle ground that sort of doesn't quite fit the First Amendment, but it accomplishes the same goal in a very insidious fashion that we would want to stop, because it results in less free speech. That's my point.
Yeah. Now, Spotify is not a good example of that, right? You don't think that they're under that kind of pressure. I mean, it's not a likely breakup candidate. You could argue that it should be, but it's not in the crosshairs of the Justice Department right now, so far as we know.
No, but I mean, you never know. And, and there could be a case. There could be a case about Google modifying its algorithm that somehow helps or hurts Spotify. And, the way Apple changed its algorithm, I think, that hurt Facebook or something. Or, I mean, there could be their interactions all the time, and an antitrust suit against one of the big boys could affect the little boys. But yeah, no,
that's like a triple.
Facebook is a much better example. But and you know why it's called corporatism? Was that your problem?
I just wasn't sure where you were. No, I know. I mean, I don't. I guess I don't quite understand why that is called corporatism.
It's called corporatism because it involves corporations. That's a distraction. It's called corporatism because it's based on the fallacious presentation of society as a corpus, as a body,
right?
That has eyes and ears and a mouth and a stomach, so that it has like a limited number of firms that are the eyes and ears. Those would be the journalistic monopolies. And then it has a limited number of firms that do the heavy lifting. Those would be the manufacturing monopolies. And sort of each profession is a part of this social whole, as opposed to a model that says, okay, there's a state and there's 300 million individual citizens who all have their rights. That would be the non-corporatist model. So you'd have more rights. You have more rights if you're a professional reporter because your role in the body is to be the eyes and ears. You have more rights than the average Joe. So reporters who want special privileges are evoking a corporatist model of society.
I think you did explain that to me one time, and I'll try to remember it now.
I assume that Jonah Goldberg explains it. It's the economic model of fascism. I assume Jonah Goldberg explains it in his book Liberal Fascism, which I haven't read. But
what are the real hallmarks of fascism? I mean, somebody was arguing that Xi Jinping is best viewed as a fascist, and I realized it's one of those terms you kind of, I guess, know it when you see it. But
corporatism is certainly one of them, and the sort of the blending of government and big business into some sort of ruling council that's really run by the government is that. So that a business can't say "fuck you" to the government and keep on doing business because it would be rejected. So
that would apply to Putin's Russia,
right? It's very Putinistic, but that's only part of it. And I assume Hitler had, all the various forms of fascism. I wouldn't know what the other ones were, but precisely. But you could be a corporatist and not be a fascist.
So I wanted to ask you about your other obsession, your anti-meritocracy. So, what do you want the criteria for advancement to be, if not merit, like nepotism or affirmative action, or just flip a coin, or what?
I don't like the idea that the meritocracy is so rigorous that everybody on top can say, "Well, I'm better than the people down below."
You want more randomness introduced into
the system? I would like a lot more randomness introduced. And I note that the meritocracy that is, rigorous and perfect in the terms of actually putting the best people at the top is breaking down because of, it had always broken down a little because of legacy admissions. But now if you apply to college, you have the legacy admissions at the top and the affirmative action at the bottom. People in the middle are completely fucked. They're not going to get into, you have a person from Connecticut getting straight A's they're not going to get into a white person. They're not going to get into an Ivy League school anymore. But it'd be like getting struck by lightning for them to get into an Ivy League school. They're going to go to Northwestern or someplace.
Okay,
and that's not meritocratic by the old standards of the meritocracy.
Well, no, it's not. Legacies aren't meritocratic.
Right. But it's not meritocratic. But
they're half of what's creating the problem you just described, right?
Right, but the other half is new, and the idea that that people who do really well at high school and were the former candidates for Ivy League schools can't get in Ivy League schools is the change. That's what Ruth Shalit's article about niche sports was about. They're so desperate to get into Ivy League schools that they try to make their children into squash champions. Or fencing champions or baseball champions, so they can get in through the sports thing.
Yeah,
which is and even in the physics department, they're now racial quotas. Physics, Bob, you can't imagine a harder science of physics, and they're so they're not going to get the best and brightest physicists by definition. if you need the racial quota, you're not going to get the best physics.
But
so
don't you like that? If you're anti-meritocracy?
Yeah, I'm saying learn to live with it, and I'm sort of learn to live with a lot of it, and learn to live with some people getting it on connections, and have a sort of marketplace where people don't win at the front door where they get into the place. They win in the competition of ideas, and who produces the best papers that
has all the hallmarks of a specious distinction. The difference between winning at the threshold and winning inside the house. I mean, either your criteria are meritocratic or they're not.
The whole idea of credentialism is you take the best and the brightest and you groom them and you insert them at the top of the hierarchy. They don't work their way up through the hierarchy, proving at each step that they're better. We've identified them through IQ tests at the beginning, and we insert them in the positions of leadership. That's the whole point of the Michael Young meritocracy. And so this would relax that. This would say you have to have more what Jim Fallows calls a true meritocracy, where you prove yourself and at each stage, and you have to, you have to rise by actually winning. And I was arguing that the NFL was sort of a true meritocracy because if you didn't win, you got fired. I got all sorts of blowback from that, mainly about Lane Kiffin.
You mean the coaches thing?
I had no argument against Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is a disaster.
Is that a hapless white coach?
Yes.
Well, it's funny. It was after I brought up in the Parrot room that column I had seen in the New York Times alleging discrimination against black coaches. And I was saying, well, it shouldn't be hard to actually look at the numbers and compare the won-loss records. It was after that the lawsuit was filed by this coach for whatever team. What? Yeah.
Flores.
So
I think he was in Miami. I don't know.
So you would certainly think that in the course of that lawsuit, one side or the other is going to do what I was saying would be interesting.
He's done it, but the problem is it's a small numbers problem. There's so few black coaches that they could all have had winning records but been jerks.
Wait. Has he shown that black coaches with winning records are more likely to be fired than white coaches with comparable records?
There can't be many black coaches who got fired because there weren't many black coaches to begin with. But I think he has shown that a lot of black coaches get fired with winning records, and I assume that they're a lot better than the records.
A lot of white coaches get fired with winning records. It happens all the time. But the question is, I'm saying do the math. Look, we can worry about statistical significance later.
I'm sure he's done the math.
But it is possible in principle.
I'm sure he's done the math.
But sounds like he hasn't presented the data the way I'm asking. You're saying he's just saying that black coaches will win a record.
The people that commented in my Twitter feed aren't presenting the data the way I'm asking. I don't know how. I haven't read the briefs. I don't know how he's presenting the data.
Well, okay. So I await. You would think one side or the other has it must bear on the side of one or the other, right? It must be in the interest of one side or the other in this lawsuit to actually bring out the data I want brought out. So we will see.
Yeah. I would like it seems to me a world that had more localism, more randomness, where Bob Rice stays in Texas and becomes a really smart guy in Texas, might be preferable on social equality grounds to a ruthless meritocracy. And it's especially preferable to a ruthless meritocracy that isn't even a meritocracy.
So I'm supposed to take one for the team. Mickey's born in Beverly Hills, goes to Harvard Law School. Bob, could you stay in Texas and work at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, please? America will be a better place. This is my point. It's easy for you to fucking say no meritocracy. You were born on the top. Mickey, I'm getting on my high horse. I'm feeling this shit, man. We're approaching a full-on populist rant. Should I stop?
I didn't say I had to get into a good school. I'll be there in Northwestern with the kids from Connecticut.
But it's funny that the example that sprung to your mind was of the Bob Wrights of the world staying in Texas rather than the Mickey Kouses of the world being drowned in their fucking backyard swimming pools, which is the solution I advocate.
I don't have a swimming pool, Bob.
You were not brought up in a house with a swimming pool?
No.
Well, then what are you doing with that pool boy, Mickey? Hector?
You don't know. I looked at my record of the college. My mother looked at the record of the college admissions, and it said, although he didn't go to Harvard, his father has achieved some distinction.
Wait, where did it say this?
The Harvard admissions folder. So it's not like they said, hey, this is the guy in the elite. We have to get him.
Wait, this was whose admissions folder?
Harvard's.
No, but what person's admission folder?
Mine.
It said your father didn't go to Harvard, but
and
he's not a total failure?
They held that against me. But yes, but I guess they gave me points. Why would they give me points for my father being distinguished? I don't understand. Makes no sense. But
that's fascinating.
Maybe they were just chit-chatting. That's how it used to work. I don't think it's how it works.
I mean,
anymore.
That's another category, by the way, not the legacy, but the son or daughter of X famous person. They get an edge because they know that they will have a leg up.
Well, my father wasn't famous enough for that.
Well, he was a California Supreme Court justice, was he not?
Not when I applied. He was a Superior Court judge when I applied, I think.
But for his age, that was quite an achievement.
Not really. He was good. So that was his achievement.
Even though he didn't go to Harvard. Where did he go to school?
UCLA.
Wow.
But
and he overcame that. That's amazing.
He overcame the stigma. What was I going to say? It was a good thought too. Damn it.
You sure anyway, it was? So, how about that lab leak news?
Yeah,
bring it on.
I mean, I guess that there has to be some. There has to be some minimum level of competence, like what affirmative action people are always saying. You have to be competent and qualified, even if you're not the best. So but it wouldn't bother me if like I had this idea that they got affirmative action for different cultures because you want diversity of culture. I'm sure there's an idea hundreds of people have had, and the Dialectic is already destroyed. And in the middle of the week, I thought this is a terrible idea because you'll get all these uptight white black kids trying to pretend that they're really part of,
fascinating,
really
culture.
down with hip hop culture, and it could make it for a great sitcom actually. But and why would you want? And they wouldn't get in if they were honest, right? Because they're just black guys who represent the mainstream or immersed in the mainstream culture. But and then I thought, but everybody who applies to college is faking it in some way.
Totally, that's what they want.
So let them fake being being members of ghetto culture and trying to get in that way. I mean, I told them my favorite book was Dag Hammarskjöld's Markings. Give me a break. A complete lie.
You said that in your essay?
I think they asked for 3 books or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Complete bullshit. So
right. Everybody.
It just be bullshit like all the other bullshit. So what? So
tell us the lab leak news.
The lab leak news is they accidentally discovered a missing link. The missing link between the bat and the coronavirus that showed up, that's caused the academic, and it was in a residue left by a lab in China. I think I've got this right. That sort of showed up contaminating some other research they were doing, the way like peanuts contaminate like food processing companies. And they looked at it and discovered, hey, this is halfway between the bat and what was in the field, and I think it even came from Wuhan.
So this is supposed to support the lab leak hypothesis?
Yeah, because they had this thing lying around the lab.
But I mean, it sounds like a missing link, and I was kind of thinking the lab leak hypothesis is there is no missing link. It didn't evolve. They just inserted all this shit in the bat version, and suddenly you've got COVID.
Well, they started inserting the shit, and then it contaminated the machinery, and then they inserted some more shit. That would be the argument.
Where did you see this?
It didn't. I saw it in my friend John Ellis's news item, so I should.
You see everything in your friend John Ellis's.
Well, it's a good. Are
you getting like a piece of the action here?
I may not have seen it there. Actually, I may have seen it somewhere else. It did not seem to be attracting the frenzy of conspiracy. I told you so's that you would think this would attract.
Well, I think that's partly. I think that's partly because pro-lab leak people, now that everyone is a little cocooned, I mean, not completely cocooned, but I think the pro-lab leak team thinks that like the game is over. They're like talking as if there's no doubt.
That could be it.
Yeah, they think they've won. They don't have anything else to prove.
The only person who hates the lab leak theory is Ann Coulter.
Why does she hate it?
Because she thinks it's promoted by neocons who want to start a war with China by saying it's all the Communist Party's fault.
Well, it did get a lot of early play from people who want tension with China, like Steve Bannon, although he's not a neocon. He does.
I think Ann was thinking of people more neoconish than Steve Bannon, but
like who are they? You don't want to put words in her mouth.
I can't put words in her mouth. I mean,
but what are the words you would put?
I would nominate Tom Cotton, somebody like that. But
yeah, well, that makes sense.
But
there were a lot of them. There was Peter. What's his name?
That's not because I've talked to her. I don't know who she would nominate.
But who's the Trump guy who you wouldn't say is necessarily neocon, but the anti-China guy in the Trump administration, Peter Navarro.
Navarro? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about it. Anyway, it's I don't think Peter Navarro wanted a physical war with China. I think he wanted a trade war. And by the way, there's as long as we're on the subject,
yeah,
there was another piece of news which I'm pretty sure I learned from John Ellis, which was there was a report that China issued saying, if we decouple, we really are the losers in a lot of different industries because we rely on either interacting with American industry and its advances, or stealing them or learning from them or something. And it enumerated all the industries where China is still behind us and where they benefit from interaction and would lose if there was a break. And then it was quickly withdrawn because it was obviously a stupid thing for China to release to the public. Here's why we really need America, right?
And what was it? It was like a government memo or something?
It was from some government think tank, chew honest think tank.
You remember what the
realistic, all I remember is semiconductors.
Well,
hard to believe they're behind us in semiconductors, but.
Well, I think both of us are behind Taiwan in our ability to actually make they're bringing these factories here. I mean, like Samsung is investing in a factory, and so we're going to have these semiconductor factories here in a few years. But a friend of mine who knows this business well was saying, it may be a challenge with America's workforce, frankly. He said it's an incredibly exacting business. I mean, first of all, there's this stereotype, whether true or not, that no one in the entire solar system does this like Asian women, right? That's a stereotype about a certain kind of work in semiconductor factories. It's very fine-grained, dexterous.
It also applies to, I think, the work of hair transplants, of just transplanting strand by strand your hair from the side of your head.
Have you already started interviewing Asian women for that job?
No, but I have a feeling it's certainly done. It's certainly painstaking work, and I bet there's a bias for Asian women.
You're thinking,
in terms of who does
I'm glad you're thinking this through. We don't want the job botched. So you should go. You should go to where.
No, I have friends who are doing it ahead of me, Bob. We'll see how they turn out.
You want a lot of canaries in this coal mine or whatever. Or guinea pigs is a better metaphor. Hey, Fraser. What was I going to say? Oh shit. He was saying also it's like it isn't just that. He's saying there's something about the whole nature of the setup, the factory and everything. You just can't have any fuck ups. He was saying, like, if they're going to start doing like the highest grade of chip factory in America, they're definitely going to have to do top flight drug testing. You just, for reasons I don't understand, you just can't have one fuck up, one person stumbling around in the whole factory, or it'll really take a toll on efficiency or something.
Yeah, well, that doesn't. It gets complicated when you. Obviously, different countries are supposedly different better at different kinds of work. If you get into seamstressing, there are more countries than Asian countries that are good at it.
Man, I remember when I was 12, I went to the Levi's factory in San Francisco. I led our junior high class on we all had to organize I organized a field trip to the Levi's factory.
Yeah. And a lot of this,
they were all Asian American women.
A lot of this cultural. Are you taught from age 3 to sew, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be better.
Now I think, is it Intel that's going to build a chip factory in Ohio? I can find out.
I don't know. I thought Intel was recently humiliated when it sort of decided, hey, we can't compete with China on some very advanced chip.
Well, Intel has definitely fallen upon hard times, although I think there are signs of a comeback.
I don't know if it was production of semiconductors or the research and design of ever more powerful semiconductors. So I will send you the link and you can find out for yourself.
Okay. I wrote it down somewhere and I will come across it eventually. So what else? So should I talk about parental investment?
Sure.
So Robert Trivers wrote this paper. As I said in the regular podcast, Steve Pinker tweeted a couple of weeks ago, it's the 50th anniversary of Robert Trivers' paper on parental investment and sexual selection. Super important thing. And first of all, as with so many things, the basic idea can be found earlier in George Williams's book, Adaptation and Natural Selection. And not only that, but the basic way to test it can be found there, if I'm recalling correctly. And the theory... So what it's supposed to explain, Darwin had puzzled over why in so many species, females seem to be, I think he used the word choosier. Seems to be often the case that the male is definitely up for sex. The female is deciding among the male suitors, not just, humans where he thought he saw it, but in many, many other species. And he didn't come up with a satisfactory explanation. What now is the accepted, and I think almost certainly correct explanation, is that it has to do with, the fact that males can reproduce very often and females not so often. So in our species during evolution, a woman could only reproduce about every 3 years because it isn't every 9 months. It was like every 3 years because they would nurse, and nursing suppresses ovulation. And so not many kids at all are you going to have. And so from your point, one way to put it is it's a rare, they're small number of therefore precious investments that you can put your genes in. That is the woman. Whereas the man can, in principle, if they can find enough women to cooperate,
right,
can just, and they don't need to worry about any one working out so well because in principle, they can have plenty. Right. Now, as it happens in our species, there is male parental investment. There is there is bonding. Well,
this seems completely obvious. I can't believe Darwin didn't think of it.
He didn't get it. And it wasn't, the thing that, first of all, there's some question as to what the most precise way analytically to phrase the dynamic. Trivers talked about investment, the female, how much she invests in it. It's this egg, it's this blah, blah, blah. And it seems, I think now a lot of people would say a better way to look at it is just how frequently can they reproduce in principle under certain circumstances and compare those two. But anyway, the kind of ingenious thing that I'm almost sure George Williams did, I've got the book here, but is he said a way to test this theory is, there are a few species where the sex roles are reversed. There are like these seahorses where the male has a pouch. The egg is deposited there, although the female produces the egg. And at that point, the female can go off and reproduce with another male. Male is stuck.
Right.
There are birds where the male sits on the nest, like phalaropes.
Right.
And I believe Williams was the first person to point out that you could just look at these species and see if it's the males that are choosier. And basically the prediction held true. And that's one reason you have, there's a fair amount of confidence in this now. I suspect if I went back and read the Trivers paper, I'd see that what he probably did, he did the same thing with reciprocal altruism, another theory that can be found in George Williams's book that Trivers is famous for. He did sketch out the psychological implications, like with reciprocal altruism, which is the psychological dynamic responsible for friendship. Trivers recognized that the psychology would include, not just like bonding with a friend, but also being alert for signs of betrayal, being outraged by betrayal that happens at the hands of a friend, and so on. So he kind of, and I think he does the same thing in the parental investment paper. I don't know if he gets into the thing, into the asymmetry of jealousy that Martin Daly and Margot Wilson documented so well later.
What's the asymmetry of jealousy?
Well, there's two kinds of jealousy. You can be jealous of your mate becoming attached, just emotionally attached to another person, and you can be jealous of them having sex with the other person. Now, in our species, both men and women are jealous about both, but men seem, relatively speaking, men, I guess the way to put it, although I'm getting fuzzy on all these things, is that they are, if you compare like the ratio of their concern about sexual infidelity as opposed to emotional infidelity, the male's ratio is higher. You might say, but the point is that look, if a male is helping to, if we're talking about his mate, lifelong mate, like spouse, and a male is is spending his life raising a kid that doesn't have his genes, that is disastrous in Darwinian terms. Whereas, and that's a consequence of the wife going and having an affair. Whereas from the wife's point of view, if the male has the affair, that in itself is not devastating in Darwinian. She doesn't want it to happen. It's natural for her to be jealous of it because it could portend all kinds of things, and it's a time suck in any event. But you would expect to see different, different degrees of emphasis in terms of jealousy, sexual versus emotional. I think Martin Daly and Margot Wilson really figured this out and came up with they went back and looked, and one thing they found, which was important, is that if you took a close look at already existing survey data, you could see the sex difference, but nobody had really made a big deal of it because they hadn't had the theoretical reason to think it was a big deal. And then David Buss did a bunch of experiments where he would actually hook men and women up to machines and say, okay, now, where you could, where the machine would register how emotionally upset they were and say, okay, now imagine your mate having sex. Now imagine your mate, just coming to like another person and so on. So, again,
this seems like,
well, now it does. It's like
maybe not because everybody's read Darwin, but it seems like
no, Darwin didn't have the answer.
Okay, you don't think it's in the novels of Balzac that the women tolerate men straying more and go crazy when there's emotion involved?
Oh yeah, that sure, but the explanation.
Oh, okay.
The Darwinian explanation. I mean, that's another, in a certain sense, a kind of evidence is when you point out that the theory predicts this, and then you say, and by the way, you can go back to the last 3 millennia of literature and find that this is the pattern. That is a certain kind of corroboration.
It's fair. The male equivalent is sort of pretty heavy in Othello, for example.
Yeah. Now, wait, say that again.
not wanting to think of your wife actually having sex with another man is,
although,
it seems to be pretty central to Othello.
Now that can be arousing. I'm not speaking from personal experience, but
did Trivers do that too?
Well, no, but there's a thing. There's a kind of a known thing.
Right.
Spalding Gray worked this into one of his monologues, and
I think it involves the word cuck.
Yeah, but see, there's this thing where if you actually caught a mate in the act of, tell me when this is too, even for the Parrot Room.
Not for the Parrot Room.
Okay, we're still okay.
We're just getting into the Parrot Room.
We're just getting into Parrot Room territory. No, if I mean, I'm sure there are species of there are primate species probably where this is more common, but where the male comes upon the female having sex and immediately wants to have sex to dislodge, to outcompete the sperm of the male that was having the sex. You can imagine that having playing a role in the evolution of male sexual psychology, even in humans, although I think the logic would be stronger in more promiscuous species. Not that there's not natural promiscuity for both men and women and humans, but
it's hard to see how it's gets your genes into the next generation. But
but there are in some species there are adaptations, and maybe in ours, that seem specifically attributable to the logic of a male of their sperm outcompeting sperm that's already in there. Okay, to actually fighting it out at that level. It may be properties of the sperm or the semen. But I think now we are getting, well, first of all, we're exhausting my knowledge. Anyway, the Trivers joke. By the way, this came to my mind when, we alluded to when Meatloaf died, the song Paradise by the Dashboard Lights. I mean, that's like a kind of a classic. I mean, in my book, in The Moral Animal, I think the lyric I used to illustrate the dynamic was the Carole King song, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? It's like, classically, it's the woman who's asking that question. Are you going to be around and to invest in the product of tonight's activities? And by the way, none of which is to say that it isn't sometimes men who are heartbroken by the woman who leaves after sex. It happens and so on. But anyway, the Meatloaf song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, that's a classic. Why are you putting your hand over the camera? Are you doing something you don't want us to know about, Mickey?
I'm eating.
Uh-huh. That's what I think that was what Jeffrey Toobin first said. And when that alibi didn't hold up. So the anyway, Paradise by the Dashboard Lights is there's an actual dialogue I didn't realize between a man and a woman. There's a woman who plays the role in the song. That's kind of along the same lines.
So Trevor told a joke.
He did. And my final thing by way of segue to Trivers' joke, which he told to me privately, is that I was debating Katha Pollitt about all this. After my book came out, I debated her at the 92nd Street Y, and she was doing this thing where she said, well, women like to have sex, in this casual manner, and this and this and this, and I said, you're telling me that women are as licentious as men seem to be, and I'm telling you that men are even more licentious than they seem to be. And this Trivers joke is exactly in that spirit. And it's not necessarily. What's that?
There was a comedian in Hollywood whose one of his lines was, "If women knew what men were really thinking, they'd never stop slapping us."
Well, Mickey, that's not funny.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Anyway, the joke is it was guy walks into a singles bar and just walks up to a woman. He doesn't say anything first. He just looks at her and says, "You want to have sex?" And she looks at him and says, "My place or yours?" And he says, "Listen, if this is going to be a hassle, forget about it." It makes exactly the point that I was making to Katha Pollitt.
No, it's not that bad.
Well, the point is, I was told to me personally, privately, by the guy that Steve Pinker thinks should be enshrined in the Hall of Fame.
Even though he stole all his ideas from this Williams guy.
Steal is a strong word. I'm sure you can find Williams cited in the relevant papers. But another thing Trivers said to me, and this is on film somewhere, I have this whole archive of me interviewing like Trivers and Williams, who's no longer alive, and Bill Hamilton, who's no longer alive, who did Kin Selection. I haven't done anything with it. But anyway, Trivers acknowledged, he was either talking about Williams, or I think he was talking about Williams, that he should have been more generous in his credit. But it's a common thing. He technically didn't break the rules. Williams is cited.
I know the feeling.
Who should have cited you? Should I have cited you?
No, I should have cited Professor Lawrence Mead of NYU.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
Beat me by a couple of months. And I did cite him several times in the middle of paragraphs, 2/3 of the way through my book.
But see, that's the tough one, is when you already have an idea and you haven't gotten it from anywhere else. And then somebody comes up with it and then you see it and you think, well, wait a second, do I have to cite this fucker?
Right. Well, Darwin had that feeling big time, right?
He did with Alfred Russel Wallace. Yes. And he managed to brilliantly maneuver, as I document in my book, to leave Alfred mired in relative obscurity. Hey, it's a dog eat dog. It's an ape eat ape world.
So I'm looking for this article on wokeness.
Yeah.
That Eric Kaufman, I think he's the author of White Shift.
Yeah. So I brought that to your attention, but I had only glanced at it. And the argument was, I mean, I can find it while we're talking because it's...
No, I found it.
Okay, I will want to be...
The argument is that all these people are running around saying the counterattack on wokeness has started. The tide has turned. Glenn Youngkin's been elected governor on an anti-CRT platform, and Chris Rufo and Ryan Girdusky are running around the country electing conservative school boards, and wokeness is on the run. And this guy was obviously a very smart guy, who's sort of the paradigmatic smart newsletter writer named N.S. Lyons.
Lyons. Lyons. We don't know.
Writes like a guy, but we don't know.
What do you mean by that, Mickey? You mean he's smart? Is that what you're saying, Mickey?
His style is sort of alpha male-y.
Oh,
I think. Maybe I'm wrong. You want to bet? He has 20 reasons why this is bullshit, why wokeness is here to stay, and we should prepare for basically a wokeness for the rest of our lives, I think. I think the simple way to get into it is just for me to quickly read the 20 reasons why wokeness isn't going away anytime soon.
Okay, the first one, I'm looking at this too, bothers me right away. It's that one does not simply walk away from religious beliefs. You know, there's this tendency to denigrate wokeness by calling it a religion. God, you can call almost everything a fucking religion.
I thought, but we have 19 more to go, so why don't I read them all quickly?
Okay.
Because some of the other ones may be more persuasive. Okay? The void of meaning still hasn't been filled. I.e., there was a gaping hole of meaning in people's lives created by the uprooting forces of secular liberal modernity, and wokeness was one way to resolve it. But the social atomization hasn't been reversed. Again, similar argument. Atomization is probably the inevitable byproduct of liberal modernity. So people will try to respond. You know, I think food trucks are going to solve the problem, but this guy thinks wokeness solves the problem.
Well, that's my point. That is an objection I have to a lot of this, I think, as I'm looking at it, is that, well, you can say wokeness is the response to this. You can say a billion other things are. Why are they not going to last forever? Anyway,
right.
Go
that
ahead.
Was one of my big points. You've now stolen.
Yeah.
But you better credit me.
Mickey Kaus thought of that only days after I first thought of it.
The information revolution is still reverberating. I assume he's information revolution led to a certain amount of wokeness. It certainly led to cancel culture.
Like
There is no authority anymore. Political parties can't choose their policies. I guess he argues that a small minority of committed people are running the parties.
I mean, just to stop here, how much of this cannot be, if you fill in Trumpism instead of Wokism, how much of this doesn't work? I think all of this works, right? So Trumpism will last forever and Wokism will last forever. That's what he's established so far.
Okay. He's got 12 more to go.
Okay.
Majorities don't matter. As Nassim Taleb has explained in detail, it's typically not the majority that sets new societal rules, but the most intolerant minority. Personnel is policy. And there he makes the argument, which I think is true, is that, he makes that later, sorry. The argument being, you can tell the teachers not to teach CRT, but if you have a generation of teachers who've left ed schools determined to teach CRT, even if not in name, they're going to teach something close to CRT. And there's no way to stop them short of firing them all, which they're not going to do. All institutional high ground is still occupied by the woke left. Long marches are long, so you can't expect to reverse it without a long march of your own through the institutions. Culture wars are generational wars, and the young are woke as hell, citing Gen Z as, unfortunately, a woke as hell. Although I note only 41% support censorship of hate speech. That means 59% don't. Or 50. Yeah. So, hey, we're winning. The youth are still coddled and mentally broken. Elite overproduction is still in overdrive. In other words, we're producing more college-educated people than we can employ. What are these people going to do? They're going to find great jobs for themselves as diversity counselors and other woke bullshit jobs. That's one argument. Wokeness is still required by law. There are parts of the Civil Rights Act that seem to require a certain amount of wokeness. Money is still power, and the Ford Foundation still has a lot of it. Only 4 more to go. The opposition is still only political. In other words, you can elect Glenn Youngkin, but you can't. That doesn't create the institutions that are going to generate anti-wokeness. Partisanship is still getting worse, and Wokelash 2.0 is entirely possible. None of the levers of power have changed or will change hands. And I think here he's talking a lot about the deep state, not necessarily who's governor. And Leviathan has woken. It may be that it's similar to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I guess he argues that people in power he takes as his text an Ibram Kendi article where he said there was an anti-race. He wanted an anti-racist constitutional amendment, which basically created a Department of Anti-Racism that was responsible for pre-clearing everything that happened in society, basically. And he claims that deep state is still there, even if not in name. That's his argument. Sounded better when I read it than when I read through it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sticking with my original. I haven't read it, but just that a whole lot of this could apply. So many of the things he sees as the conditions that gave rise to this and haven't gone away gave rise to a bunch of other shit too, including the reaction against Wokism.
But Trump never controlled all the institutions of society. He only controlled this political beachhead at the top. So the analogy breaks down there. But I agree. One of the arguments is that if there's a crisis of meaning and crisis of loneliness, the wokeness is not the only solution to those crises. other solutions to those crises, which should be solved, might remove the cause of wokeness. So the solution to society is the solution to wokeness.
I mean, also
that's where the food trucks come in.
Also, I have some questions for NS Lions. Like, what is the top-rated cable news channel? What is the top-rated podcast? Fox and Joe Rogan, interestingly, don't share the same ideology. Rogan's not nearly as right-wing as not in the way that Fox News is, but they're both very anti-woke and they're doing okay.
It would be completely compatible with his thesis to have a 30 years war between the Fox Newses and the woke people. So the mere existence of Fox News doesn't disprove what he's saying. It just means the war is not going to be resolved. I guess he seems to expect a huge amount of persistence and long-term planning and indefatigability on the part of the woke that's sort of at odds with first it's at odds with modern society's tendency to do everything faster than used to happen in pre-current societies. Second, there's there's a natural tendency of youth to revolt against the predecessor generation. So
right.
So what if the argument would be, so what if there are all these teachers running around making elementary school kids go on privileged walks and identify by their racial identities? When has what elementary school teachers have taught kids ever really took? All the nuns teaching Catholic boys not to have sex. How did that work? I don't think it worked very well. So I could see where educational schools self-selecting for woke people who are going to want to become teachers would produce a whole bunch of woke teachers. I don't see how those teachers, when they go to elementary school and try to transmit their ideology to sixth graders, are going to have the same amount of success. We'll see.
Yeah.
And the existence of Gen Z is a bad example for me because it is woke as hell, and I terrify what happens when they're a third or fourth half of the workforce. That's his best argument. You anti-wokers are so fucked because Gen Z is going to roll over you.
I mean, on his side kind of is the fact that at least at the college level, institutionally, tenure does tend to slow the rate of change. On the other hand, I think the extent of wokeness in universities may be overstated. I was talking to a political scientist at Princeton. There was this letter that went around that got a lot of faculty signatures at Princeton, more than you'd think. A couple of years ago, you probably saw reference to it. Because one thing it said was like sabbaticals should depend, well, it didn't put it this way, but the length of your sabbatical should depend on the color of your skin. It did say that people of color should have longer sabbaticals or something. And I was saying and I knew somebody in philosophy, a professor in philosophy, who said that there were graduate students, and this should alarm, and this is consistent with NS Lions, there were graduate students telling him they'd never speak to him again if he didn't sign the letter. This is a tenured professor they're talking about. He was not on the side of the letter, but apparently in his department, he was a minority. But this political scientist said, oh, yeah, well, philosophy has gotten pretty woke. But in my department, he was like, in political science, not even close. It's like nobody was taking this seriously. So, but, the people who get the publicity are the people who sign the letters, right? Because that's what seems new and weird. But it's far from being like a university-wide thing. It
is just hard to, there's a mystery here because it's hard to believe that these up and coming generations are woke just because they were taught that by their teachers. I mean, when have students ever said, oh, my professor told me to be woke, so I'm woke? There has to be some other underlying cause, whether it's their coddling or fragility or something, their lack of role in society, that the men can't go and be men, so they become these, gender neutral, cream puffs or something. There's some extra teaching, extra educational cause that's the real cause of why it's happening. Like I say, there may be other solutions to those problems, or you could change whatever social circumstance. You can give men a role again, and then they won't, they'll grow up different. So I do think that's a weak spot, is the emphasis on how important teachers are. And well, if the teachers say this, of course, the next generation is going to have that. But so I sort of don't care what happens at university. He does a very good job mocking Barry Weiss University, though. Say,
oh, good.
Don't tell me about fictional universities in Austin, Texas. Or she, whoever does it, whoever Ennis Lyons is, does a good job of mocking Barry Weiss University.
The name seems familiar, like N.S. Lyons. Haven't I seen that somewhere?
I don't know. He also, there's also this concept which you use, which is very good, of the fake elites, which is people who should be elite, like doctors and lawyers, but aren't really elite. They don't have power. They just have money. And that's a lot of that dovetails with the Julius Krein argument that, even the elites are unhappy with the way society's going. And
true.
Although Julius Krein goes a step further and says even investment bankers, the alleged masters of the universe, aren't happy with the way society's going because they're losing all their power to the guys who are even above them.
Wait,
so,
who are the guys who are above them?
I guess Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, the head of Apollo, Leon Black, the head of Apollo Equity. But if you're just an ordinary investment banker doling out cash, you don't rate anymore. You're not doing anything interesting. You're not saving the world or changing the world. You're sponsoring an app. I think that was basically Krein's argument. I forget he had some specific reason why investment banking had completely lost its cachet. But
can't happen too soon.
Anyway, that's I guess that's all I have to say about this guy. I'm sorry.
I was genuinely kind of heartened by this birds aren't real thing. They did a New York Times Daily podcast on it, which, by the way, did you realize, they did a thing on Joe Rogan today, the Daily did, on the Rogan controversy. And Michael Barbaro, I think he said that the Daily is the number 2 podcast, like in America or the world or something.
I believe
number
that.
2 only to Joe Rogan, which is pretty amazing. But in which case, this birds aren't real thing is now known by millions of people. It's not like some kind of scoop of mine.
So is that like Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself?
No, it's a joke. It's absurdism. They don't really believe that birds aren't real. It's Gen Z. And what I think is heartening is, it's a parody of the conspiracy theorists. And so I guess it is itself more anti-right-wing than anti-left, although there are real conspiracy theories on the left. But the guy who started it was brought up, he was kind of homeschooled by evangelical Christians who themselves had these, kind of conspiratorial or quasi-conspiratorial ideas that they tried to sell him on about the evils of the world out there. But he started it.
Is it mocking Q? Is it mocking Q?
That would be among the things it's implicitly mocking. It actually happened. It started, he says, at an anti-abortion rally where he was there and just looking around. There are all these intense people. And he found like a poster that had a blank sign. He just thought he'd make his own sign. And he just thought he would just do something that made no sense in context. And he just wrote, birds aren't real, and held it up. And then somehow that started going viral locally. This was in Tennessee or Kentucky or something. I think somebody interviewed it. Somebody with a smartphone asked him some questions or something. And he stays in character except for this one interview with the New York Times, where he just goes around saying birds aren't real. Which birds are a good candidate for that claim because they are so mechanical looking and not, like as fluid as like mammals. But anyway, the point is, like, honestly, I mean, the ideological tribalism has gotten so bad that if like the whole next generation was just absurdist, not quite nihilistic, but absurdist, That would be an improvement. If they just couldn't take political discourse seriously, I think things have gotten so bad. That might be a nice cooling off period, you know?
It's certainly one possible solution to society not having meaningful jobs and careers for you. You can just laugh at it and go create something and not worry about whether you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a big cheese.
Well, you got to make a living, but
right.
This is an art project.
In terms of elite overproduction, you can go work as a barista and have a PhD and just laugh at it and think the barista thing is how you make a living. It's weird. We were talking about the Polish vote in Chicago. My friend Tom Gagan took me to a Polish hipster cafe where all these Poles were like serving bacon and eggs to people, but it was staffed completely by purple-haired Polish youngsters. And they were pissed off, man. They were not ironic at all. They were like, you could just tell they did not like the fact that they had to work in a cafe. And
how did this manifest itself? They're like, here are your fucking eggs.
Sort of that sort of thing, yeah. And it turned out this was also the place where Hillary Clinton had her fundraiser and said, "Well, it's not like I was baking cookies."
Well, this was the very cafe.
Yes, he pointed to the very spot, but the cafe didn't last long. Here's your fucking eggs. May not be the best customer
that was
relations.
The first warning sign with Hillary. You talk about a complete lack of political sensibility.
She's back. Is it possible? You know, her response to the Trump taking the documents from the White House was to basically say, and the email the attacks on my emails were bullshit, and history should record that. Well, that's that's the good Hillary. The good Hillary is transparent. The problem with Hillary, she was always a complete mask that you didn't know what the hell was going on behind it. And if she goes around cussing like a sailor, that's the first step toward redemption for her, right?
I guess.
I still don't want her as president because she has epically bad judgment. But she appointed Robbie Mook to run her campaign and ignored her husband Bill Clinton's advice. So
he said, "Don't choose Robbie Mook."
No, he said, "Go to Wisconsin and campaign. You might lose Wisconsin."
Oh.
And Robbie Mook said, "Oh, don't worry. Our models predict we have Wisconsin."
You remember when she said, seriously, the phrase vast right-wing conspiracy? She said she was a victim of a, quote, vast right-wing conspiracy. Or maybe she said Bill was or something. You remember that?
Right. Yeah. Well, she was not completely inaccurate.
No. But the point is, a lot of people are going to listen to that and think, you sound like a crazy person.
Right.
Right?
She'd been talking to Sid Blumenthal.
That's what I thought I remembered. Was it Sid that put that phrase in her?
I think so. But there was a small right-wing conspiracy that got her.
Well, no, I'm not saying there wasn't. I mean, first of all, if you define conspiracy broadly enough, or just even look at the technical definition, more than one person making plans, basically, and not telling anybody else about it, they're everywhere, right?
But it's like people saying I was the victim of a hit job. Well, if they have the goods on you, it's a successful hit job, They really did discover that Joe Rogan using the N-word. I assume that not all of those uses were excusable. So it was a hit job.
It's hard to say. Have you heard the mashup?
But the mashup is totally deceptive, yeah.
No, I thought actually the more damning thing, did you see the follow-up one that was just one episode from it must have been pre-Spotify days because it was his old studio with the American flag on the wall or the brick wall. And there was it must have been a stand-up comic he was interviewing, and he was saying, you can't say the N-word. And he started taunting him and saying, go ahead, say it, say it, say it. And the guy finally says it, and Joe Rogan bursts out laughing. I mean, that really looked bad. That really looked. It just the sense.
It's just a commentary on, things you can say and can't say. It's not.
I'm just saying, if I try to put
laughing at the guy for destroying his career.
If I try to put you don't know. I don't know why he was laughing, but I'm just saying, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a black person, and I know they're different, there are different black people, but comparing the montage, because the montage is so obviously out of context, you're thinking, well, he could every time be, for all we know, saying it in a certain spirit. But this one thing was just like, I don't know. He was getting such a weird kind of pleasure out of hearing the word. It seemed like that. I thought it was bad. The other thing is, actually, can I, at some point, I want you to tell me what I should write about this week. I need to know. It's urgent that I know. Yeah. And one possibility is Rogan and Spotify, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, my friends in LA are affluent, left-wing people who are into like holistic and healthy habits that are maybe they're not fringe anymore. Like intermittent fasting is no longer a fringe thing. It's a mainstream thing. But they're into all these latest health trends that may become mainstream, may not become mainstream. They love Joe Rogan. He has a huge following. There's some guy they follow who teaches a course on breathing. He wrote a book called Breathe.
Breath work?
I don't know, it's not called breath work.
Is that the thing? There's a thing now called breath work that's different.
It could be. You're supposed to breathe through your nose. Okay, I'm out. I'm never gonna make the grade.
Your mouth breather.
I have sinusitis, so my nose is blocked after that. So, but Joe Rogan showed up at one of these guys' classes. He noticed him, and Joe Rogan was sitting there on a yoga mat doing breathing exercises. He's not what the left thinks he is, what the anti-Rogan left thinks he is.
Yeah, I'm not passing judgment. I mean, he does have. He's very conspiracy theory minded. I think I told you, but long enough ago that I can repeat it. I don't think it was. Did I tell you recently? I know I told you a long time ago. This documentary, I think it's called Spare Change or something. It was one of the first 9/11 truther videos.
Right, I've heard of that.
And the guy, there was a podcast on the Daily a couple of years ago with one of the guys involved in getting it out there. And he said, well, we knew we had hit it big. And this was before YouTube existed, because they were circulating it on Google Video. He said, we knew we had hit it big when we got an order for 10 copies from somebody we had heard of. And it was Joe Rogan. He had heard of him because he was an MMA fan. And Rogan is definitely, he is, and that's why I think it's, for my money, that what's more notable about the Robert Malone stuff, and a lot of this, is the conspiracy theorizing. There's more of that in a way than flat out undeniable COVID misinformation.
But we do conspiracy theories. I do. It's
yeah, but but his guess
not completely illegitimate.
No, it's not. But but Malone. I wrote a piece about this. Malone is somebody who's not good at judging the credit. He's not good at applying evidentiary standards.
Yeah, I never fell for the 9/11 one, and I sort of admired Arianna Huffington, where she banned 9/11 trutherism from her site.
Yeah. Well, anyway, another weird thing about Rogan is this thing about overweight people. I don't know. And that's why I'm surprised there has not been a mashup of his statements about fat shaming and his various statements about that. I was assuming that would be the third apology video from him after somebody does that mashup, and it may be yet to come. But anyway, let me ask you. So, one candidate for a piece I could write is trying to talk about the Rogan Spotify thing as just kind of a frustrating example of how tribalized everything is. It's like it's like it seems like there are almost only two permissible positions. You're pro-Rogan, pro-free speech, or you're anti-Rogan, anti-free. I mean, it's not that everyone is one of those. It's just that, like, that's how you're going to be perceived.
Right.
And it seemed like you can go through and just say, like, it's weird in so many ways. I mean, first of all, I think it's a little weird that Rogan, okay, they have now taken offline over 100 of his Spotify podcasts. Okay.
Right.
So he seems to be a guy. Now, I guess maybe he's saying, well, he's probably saying it was my idea or something, but he would seem to be a guy who, in order to hang on to $100 million, is willing to see a substantial part of his archives memory hold, deep sixed. Well, is that a free speech? Is that a champion of free? Doesn't the champion of free speech say, fuck you, you can have your 100 million. I ain't destroying, a big fraction of my life's work.
Well, it's not being destroyed.
Well, no, I mean, it doesn't exist. Can you find them? No. Spotify is the exclusive distributor.
It depends how his contract is. Maybe he gets ownership of them and he can do what he wants with them.
Well, I'm sure he can still repost them, but where are they now? Anyway, it's just, this has gotten no comment. I mean, that's how kind of, that seems interesting. It seems, and then there's the thing we kind of already talked about, which is that the head of Spotify is a guy who is basically trying to ruin what was like nirvana for free speech people, which is a completely open distribution system for podcasts. Anybody with it, just sign up for an RSS feed and you got a podcast.
Right.
He's trying to turn Spotify into this behemoth of, the way I'd put it is traditionally, Fraser, come here then. Sorry. Traditionally, I wouldn't have to worry about my podcast getting canceled. I could say bad shit about anybody and nobody would have that power. Spotify is turning itself into the place that has that power. Like it actually is getting to the point where this Daniel Ek guy that runs Spotify, you kind of say, well, do I want to talk shit about? I mean, it's not like he would bother himself with reaching down and destroying a podcast of this magnitude, but there is that irony. It's like, do you understand? Like, he's trying to
approaching that corporatist middle ground I was talking about, and you said it didn't exist because Spotify was too small.
Well, I still don't see the government.
Doesn't have to be Facebook to throttle free speech.
No. I was questioning the government lever on the corporation. I was saying I don't see one with Spotify right now. Okay. That was part of your model. Okay. But Spotify has power, and it's kind of trying to corrupt the whole fucking podcast business. But because in tribal discourse, there's only two sides. It's like, well, I guess if he's not canceling Joe Rogan, he's a good guy, even though he is flushing 100 of his podcasts down the memory hole.
Rogan must have thousands of podcasts, though, right?
Fine, but it's the fucking principle. I mean,
I understand.
I don't. I think this is kind of a hard piece to write.
It's a little like it's a question of, is this a fool's errand? The idea that you're gonna monopolize this industry and all you need is a modem and a computer to start your own podcast. How's that going to work? I mean, it's like one of FDR's ventures in business. He was a terrible businessman. He tried to corner the market on ice. Okay. It's just hard to corner the market on ice. There's a lot of ice out there. It's like trying to corner the market.
Right, but there's a lot of ice makers, or there were back when ice was.
But they're not a monopoly. That's the point, I think.
Well, yeah, fine, but at least they can compete. I mean, it's two separate things going on. There does seem to be a natural tendency for a few players to dominate, even in the world of blogs, which platform-wise kind of remained open, I guess. You got that, like, suddenly you had just Instapundit and and so on. And
well, that's because it happened when the only way you could get views was to be linked by one of the big boys. So the big boys got a lot of power.
Yeah.
But then, I think newsletters and podcasts have eroded that, so that there's now a much greater diversity. I mean, who would have thought of, whatever this guy we were just talking about got a lot of traction for his article on wokeness in The Upheaval, which is one of Peter Beinart's got a lot of traction for his article in whatever Peter Beinart's newsletter is. I mean, Substack is really an anti-monopoly force. I guess if Substack had a monopoly and they changed ownership, changed management style, then we'd all be in trouble. But I think there's tendency to concentration. There's a tendency against concentration.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, later I may trot out the other piece I was thinking about writing, but the idea, I mean, the only kind of new angle on this, I mean, those are what I've said are things that are not getting said that much, but the premise for saying them would be that like, it's just a frustratingly tribal conversation. It's like, I don't want Joe Rogan canceled, but I do think that this guy who runs Spotify is a dick for giving $100 million to a guy knowing that he seriously platforms, what's his name? Alex Jones. Tom Friedman actually.
What's your other idea? Go ahead.
Well,
Tom Friedman what?
Tom Friedman actually wrote the column about Rogan, at least distinguishing between rights and responsibilities. He's saying, I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to say it, or that Spotify doesn't have a right to run it, but there is such thing as responsibility. That's progress. The other column. Well, it was just, it was going to get into, well, one thing I'm thinking about doing is really sustaining the cognitive empathy theme big time in the newsletter. I mean, I think for reasons, I guess there's no point in getting into, but this other one would be more along the lines of those. It would just be how many cases there are where your opposition to your enemy is helping your enemy. It's like all the shit America talks about China and Xi Jinping probably helps Xi Jinping with the Chinese people. So often with Putin the same way. Then there's the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing. It's like, okay, make fun of the gazpacho thing. It's helping her. Sarah Palin, New York Times was helping her with that, and so on.
Shouldn't you? But I urge you to come up with a different name than cognitive empathy. Come up with something cute, like who's the guy? The guy who runs Dilbert came up with too many cute names for things that Trump did, but one or two of them wouldn't hurt you.
Yeah, it's funny. You hear it from both sides. I mean, your line is cognitive empathy. The empathy part sounds too mushy, and
the whole thing sounds too academic.
Well, that's a separate problem.
Well, that's the problem I'm talking about.
Sometimes academic is good, though. I mean,
could be like the Barbra Streisand effect. Okay, everybody knows what the Barbra Streisand effect is, and it doesn't. It doesn't sound like off-puttingly academic. It's the Barbra Streisand effect.
Okay, let's crowdsource it.
People know what stray voltage is. That actually is sort of the gazpacho point, but not quite.
Wait, stray voltage?
Stray voltage is Obama purposely including statistics about female earnings compared to men that he knows are wrong and outdated, knowing that the right wing will then attack them, and then he'll respond, and the result is he will have his speech will have a 4-day impact instead of a 1-day impact.
Well, jiu-jitsu kind of.
Yeah, well, jiu-jitsu would be a good name.
Not for cognitive empathy.
Something like it.
Not much like it. Well, we can crowdsource it. Maybe people can suggest things. Speaking of the crowd, Sean Gibby and somebody else thought that Joe Rogan was joking when he said about Joni Mitchell, Chucky's in Love is a great song. I can kind of see.
I thought he apologized.
Well, in print, he said, oops, kind of thing, corrective. Yeah. but that could have been part of the thing too. I just don't think at that point, I mean, maybe he is that nervy, but the funny thing about that is you would think that the Chucky's in Love thing could have come back to haunt him, because remember, he was making that video. That wasn't the inward video. That video was being made in the context of him being accused of being a purveyor of misinformation. That was the big word. Now,
it's a pretty good thumb in the eye of Joni Mitchell. So
fine, but what better clip for his detractors to seize on to illustrate misinformation? You're kind of handing them a lot of ammunition, and
then so they look like twits.
Oh, give me a fucking break! Who does that stop on Twitter? There's a reason they call it Twitter, you know. I think I still puzzle over why he didn't get more shit. And I finally decided that, like, because I was expecting that to really take off. Like, oh God, no, he's never guilty of misinformation. He just thinks, Joni Mitchell wrote blah, blah, blah. And I really think, if you look at tweets that really take off, they get a certain amount of support from people with substantial Twitter followings at some point in the line, right? It's not entirely grassroots. And I think the thing is, just about everyone with a substantial Twitter following thinks there's a chance they could someday go on the Joe Rogan show. I really think there aren't that many people who want to publicly fuck with him, partly because it's just a podcast. Sure, I could get on a podcast someday. I could be on that show. I think. I mean, he has.
That's right. Yeah. No, I think that's right. That's like why did writers not attack Graydon Carter when he was running Vanity Fair?
Yeah.
Or why do they not attack David Remnick now?
With the exception of the courageous Mickey Couse.
Two suicidal people. No, don't think you're going to escape.
What have I said about Remnick? He's a fine American.
You've gone along with it. Your silence speaks volumes. I think he's a fine American too. I just think I would like to read a very good hit piece on him.
I did say he's not as good a basketball player as I am, but he would not even purport to be. Whereas he's
a better writer and a better journalist than I am. There's still room for a hit piece.
So
anyway, I think you're right. I think that's right. Everybody wants to go on Joe Rogan. People call me up and say, when he lives in LA, say, do you know Joe Rogan? Can you get me on? Yeah. So no, I think that's right.
It's all about power. Oh, that reminds me. I said I'd talk about the Pacific Trilogy. Do you have something else you want to say?
No, I'm just going to, as long as we're in talking shop, have I already talked about the problem that the reader pointed out about wanted to start some sort of media outfit for the Hooverville people, the people stuck between parties?
I saw there was a comment about that.
A very smart comment pointed out that the people who are the targets for Hooverville and agree and are stuck between the parties don't use social media. They're old fogies. So how do you reach them? How do you design a media organ that reaches them without trying a publication? Publications are inherently unprofitable. There's just too expensive. So,
but wait,
do these people get? Yes, they are. You have to print them. You have to distribute the printed physical copy.
These are people who aren't even online.
Well, the question is, that's my question. Could a newsletter work where you send it in the mail? Do they get emails? And then I wonder what percentage of these old fogies get emails.
Almost everybody gets emails.
Are you sure? Okay.
Totally.
So there you go. There's the answer.
I mean, who do you know? I know several people in their 90s. They all get email. I've emailed them. I mean, who doesn't?
I would say people in their 60s. Who have
I know people in their 60s who don't use email.
I guess everybody gets email. You're right. But they're not used to looking to it for news. That's a good point. You could design a newsletter, an email newsletter it would have to be physically attractive that would get this middle ground people. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that's all doable. I mean, you got to find them. That's the challenge. I mean, this gets back to, but I said I lost like, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 paid subscribers within the last 36 hours. And I realized it's exactly a month after I wrote this review of Don't Look Up. And I did the thing where there's a paywall right at when I, think I've got them on the edge of their seats.
Right.
And I realized, and this is why I was saying, I think I'm going to stick with cognitive empathy for a while. I mean, there's no point in luring paid subscribers with material that's not typical of what you do, right? It's like it did have a theme that matters to me ultimately buried in it about kind of tribalism and so on. But the fact is, if you ask, who's gonna pay up to read the rest of this review? You can well imagine that it's people who just they're interested in the movie. The review looks intriguing. You've got them curious about what you're going to say. And so they sign up. And the average person who signs up for that reason, they're going to spend the rest of the month being disappointed in my newsletter. It's not movie reviews. It's not about pop culture. It's not. And so Substack is very good at getting you to chase the paid subscribers. The interface, you see the numbers go up, go down.
How many did you get who didn't leave?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I picked up on that one. Of course, it's strictly speaking just a hypothesis that what I said happened is what happened.
No, I'm sure that's right.
But
I'm sure that happens, even if it didn't happen in this case. The problem with my publication is everybody who I'd want to write for it, and I'd want there to be fights in Hooverville where there are fights between homeless people. So I'd want the never Trumpers would be part of Hooverville, and the people who were disaffected from the left, the old style Democrats would be part, and they would fight with it. They hate each other, so they would fight. All these people could have their own outlets. So what does Hooverville give them that they couldn't get writing for the Dispatch or starting the Dispatch or starting their own Substack letter? And I guess the answer would be more exposure, and if it got somehow, and also it wouldn't be exclusive. They could have their newsletters too. We would just republish articles.
That's probably an underexplored area of synergy, where you take things that are being published in their newsletter, you put them in yours, and you tell them, you'll prominently advertise their newsletter and blah blah blah, and they're like, yeah, it's win-win.
Or they'd be young unknowns.
Yeah, but they're not that easy to find. I mean, where do you find the young unknowns who are great writers? And one problem with people like us, old school journalists, is you see the writing of young people and you think, well, this isn't up to my standards. And you realize it doesn't have to be. I mean, people these days will forgive a lot in writing.
Well, my early writing sucked. My later writing sucked too, but in a different way. I remember Kate Boo, who's a great writer at I told you, at the Washington Monthly. I'd never met her before in my life. She came up to me and said, I so like your writing. It has that pompous quality. And I said, you mean authoritative?
She said,
no,
yeah.
I mean pompous. And she was probably right.
I wouldn't say that about your writing.
Well,
now who are the great pompous writers of our generation?
I know where you're going with this one.
Actually, you could go a couple of places. And Leon is not the only place you could go. Not that I'm saying you would go there at all, ever, in connection with the word pompous. I'm just saying he would not be the only one if he were one, which I'm not saying he is. He could not be. For all
I don't know. Well, pompous is such a horrible quality that very few people actually.
Mickey, that is really not a nice thing to say about Leon. I cannot believe.
No, I mean who? I mean, it's hard. I mean, people who write for the Council on Foreign Relations, Henry Kissinger, when he wants to be obscure and not actually say anything.
There's something. I don't know. Who are the great pompous writers of our time? One man's pompous is another man's not quite so pompous.
Ezra Klein on a bad day.
He brings a kind of he brings a kind of humility to his whole enterprise, though. In terms of he strives for epistemic humility, which is not the same as stylistic humility. But he doesn't seem to me.
Early on, he wrote a piece about how it was some pro-Obama. It was about how visionary Obama's speechifying was, and it was really gag-makingly pompous, and sycophantic. And I wrote, I said, like, he's much too old to be this pompous.
Much too old or young?
What? Sorry?
Old or young?
Old. I mean, young people are pompous. Old people are not. And he can be very pompous. He famously, after the healthcare debate was over and Obamacare was passed, he thanked Tim Noah for his yeoman efforts. A little pat on the head for Tim Noah, some guy who's doesn't see himself as a partisan. And
if you were a god among men, Mickey, you would talk that way too.
Okay. I just wanted to hear the phrase "God among men." It turns
he's a god among men.
Okay. He's gotten a much less pompous. He's not exactly a laugh riot, however.
He's not mainly a humor writer, I would say. Let's see. What else?
It's hard to come up with. I mean, the pomposity doesn't sell, so it's very hard to get any traction at all as a pompous writer.
I don't know. There's who are the great pompous writers of the century? I mean, Walter Lippmann was a little pompous, right? But that was a more pompous age.
Well, but Walter Lippmann would never hack it.
No.
The closest you could get to George Will is to George Will, and he's not pompous.
Come on, he
makes a point of trying desperately to be not pompous.
But it doesn't work.
Fails.
He fails,
but not always.
I was once in a restaurant, and he was there several tables over, and his cell phone went off. And can you guess what the ringtone was?
Hail to the chief.
No, think about his affectation. I'm not sure they're affectation.
Take me out to the ball game.
Exactly. Did I tell you that already?
No, that's his affectation, though.
Yeah, it's like that's his common man thing.
Affecting being a common man. Well,
right. That was good.
That's not that bad.
That was good, Mickey. Who says you've lost it? I don't say you've lost it. Why do all these people say you've lost it, Mickey?
Because anyway.
Do you remember F Troop?
I didn't. I completely misinterpreted the lyrics to Sister Ray.
Did you watch F Troop when you were a kid?
No, that was Larry Storch.
He was Agarn, I think, and Sergeant O'Rourke would say, "Agarn, I don't know why everybody says you're dumb," and then they would cut to a scene that was clearly like, hours or days later, and Agarn would go, "Who says I'm dumb?" It would have taken that long, for it to occur to him. That was the joke.
Funny, there were a bunch of shows like that where I only saw the beginning of them, like Branded. I always saw the beginning of Branded, but I never actually watched an episode.
That was Branded.
It had a great introduction.
And the fellow and the fifth graders in my class had their first. Why do you remember these things? The joke song parody of it was stranded on the toilet bowl. What do you do when you're stranded and you can't reach the roll? That was pretty fucking funny in fifth grade, Mickey.
Man.
I didn't even think it was funny. It wasn't my song. I just wanted to disassociate myself from that. But that was...
I'm the guy who began the regular podcast by brandishing a roll of toilet paper. So
that's right. We've come full circle. We've achieved perfect symmetry. Can we go now? Chuck Connors.
Beavis and Butthead quality. Yes.
Do you know what sport Chuck Connors played professionally? He was
Baseball.
a star. Correct. What team?
Dodgers.
Correct. What position?
Ooh. Second base.
Oh, so close.
Outfield.
So close.
First base?
The answer we were looking for is first base.
Really?
First base. Yes.
Huh.
Now, this reminds me of something that you shared with me in between the public podcast and the Parrot Room that I don't know. This may be such a touchy subject. I shouldn't bring it up, but apparently you went your whole Little League career without a single base hit, Mickey. Is that something you like to talk about? I noticed you filled your mouth full of food the moment I asked the question. So, oops, no, Mickey's not.
The answer is it's a little more complicated than that. Beverly Hills Little League was sort of, I wasn't allowed to play in it. It was sort of, I don't know why. My mother didn't like it.
I have a theory. Oh.
It was very celebrity conscious, and Dino Martin was the pitcher for one of the teams. And
Billy of the rock group, what was it? Billy?
Dino, Desi, and Billy, yes.
Dino, Desi, and Billy. Him?
He's an interesting character.
Did you know him?
No. I saw him pitch for a few pitches, but I don't think he went to Beverly High. He was supposed to be a spoiled brat. He used to go around to tennis tournaments and, sort of assume that he would be given center court, and all the other people hated him.
Did you tell him that? Yeah, he's dead. Dean Martin's son is dead.
He joined the Air Force, and he died in it when his jet crashed. So he died in service to his country. So how much of a fucking spoiled brat could he be?
Was it during war?
He had a movie career where he was in some version of Romeo and Juliet, briefly, and he died serving his country in the Air Force, or maybe the Air Force Reserve. And the only selfish explanation was that he became addicted to fast planes, the way he became addicted to fast cars. And the only way he could get access to fast planes, the really fast planes, is to join the Air Force. I don't think that's enough of an explanation. I think he gets a bad rap. Anyway, he was in the Little League. They had these fancy uniforms. I played in the Socialist Alternative Municipal League, which was like all the fuck-ups, the people who weren't quite good enough to make Little League. And I couldn't even get a hit in that league. But I was a pitcher, and I actually won a game. So there you go. I won the sportsmanship award. As a beta male should.
Yeah, I didn't. I was like far from winning the sportsmanship award in Little League.
The basic problem was I stepped in the bucket. Hard not to step in the bucket.
So I forget so that's like when you take your stride as a hitter, right?
Instead of striding directly into the ball, you bail out because you chicken out because the ball is coming fast at you, and you step to the side. Very hard to hit the ball like that.
Yeah. I played second base behind a pitcher named Michael Norris, who later played in the major leagues. He played 1 year. He almost won the Cy Young Award for the Oakland A's before his career got I think he developed like drug problems or something. He was a buddy of Reggie Jackson's. But anyway, I mean, I was 13. He was 15. His junk, as they call, curveballs and stuff, was so amazing. Like batters would hit the deck like they're lying on the ground, and the umpire would call a strike. It was like so humiliating.
Yeah. Well, you would think there are, in tennis, the whole thing used to be the classic Roger Federer style is stride straight, perpendicular to the net, stride straight at the ball. And then guys came on like Nadal, who just like faced the net, and why couldn't a batter step in the bucket and still hit it?
Ooh. Like, you okay?
Sorry, I've lost my headphones. If you were Fred, if you were not Fred Gwynn, who's the San Diego hitter who spray hit?
Oh yeah, it'll come to me.
If you have fast enough wrists, you shouldn't have to stride in the ball. You should just be able to have fast wrists.
Well, but the whole stride thing has changed a lot. The strides are a lot more theatrical than they used to be.
Well, anyway, yes, I sucked as a hitter.
You sucked as a hitter. I was not a great hitter, but I did get some hits. I was definitely better at defense than offense. Give me a Frazier. So let's see. Should we? Quickly on the Pacific War trilogy. I just want to say, here's my takeaway from the Pacific War so far. I have kind of enjoyed thinking that I am disadvantaged by living in an age where self-promotion for journalists is especially important. And I like to think of myself who's someone who's not good at that. And of course, I take pride in not being good at it. But I've concluded that we have always lived in a world where self-promotion is everything. I mean, so in the Pacific, the two big dogs were, there was MacArthur in the Army.
Right.
And then in the Navy, they actually alternated between Halsey and a guy named Spruance or something. They would.
He obviously was not a very good self-promoter.
Well, Halsey was.
But the guy whose name you can't remember would be not so good.
No, but he was for my money, the better admiral. He and Halsey were admirals. MacArthur was on the Army side. I mean, MacArthur, it's pretty well known, was a complete fucking self-promoting asshole.
Right.
Almost everyone who ever worked with him hated him. But he did it so effectively and turned himself into such a national hero that Roosevelt wouldn't fuck with him. I mean, he had genuine power. I mean, that's the other thing. It has always been about power, folks. Joe Rogan has power now. People don't want to criticize him. MacArthur had power. People didn't want to criticize him. But the big revelation was
until Truman came along.
Until Truman finally, he had to. MacArthur was disobeying orders from the president.
Okay.
You got to pull the chain at some point.
Right.
But this guy Halsey, what a fuck up. And yet, I mean, as a 4-star admiral, he does this incredible. He has this incredible lapse where he just gets so obsessed with chasing the white whale, these aircraft carriers. He pulls all the ships out, fails to protect this like bay or something in the Philippines. This is the biggest naval battle in the history of the world, all told. It had several different dimensions, the Battle of Lehigh Gulf, and it's almost ruinous. They do lose a few ships as a result of this stunning oversight, but it's only not ruinous because the Japanese chose to withdraw ill-advisedly. But it's reasonably ruinous. But he not only recovers, but is one of the very few admirals ever given 5 stars after that, after doing something that should have gotten him canned on the spot. And again, he's kind of like MacArthur. He had managed to become so kind of legendary, and he was like a horrible person who was, always saying these things that wouldn't have sounded so shocking then, but still, even in their day, there was more kind of racist stuff about Japanese coming from him than from your average flag officer. But partly through that, he had become so well known that they didn't want to mess with him. He was too good for the narrative, even though he's a total fuck up. And so you got the two big dogs at this one point, MacArthur and him. And it's just like 100% about perception management.
Didn't MacArthur generally make smart decisions?
He was not a famously bad general. And there are some things he's given credit for. There are criticisms of him. He didn't have a blunder as big as this guy's blunder.
Whose idea was the island hopping strategy?
Well, at some level, island hopping was the only way to go. I mean, there was Japan, there were islands, and the only way there was, to hop.
Well, but the whole idea of the island hopping strategy was you didn't take every island, you took every third island or every fifth island or something, right?
That was, I think that was supported by Nimitz, who was, I think, superior to Halsey. But there were, in this particular case, they wanted to skip this is a good example, though. There was a lot of support for skipping the Philippines and going straight to, I think, Formosa. And, either that or going from Formosa. I don't have my geography study. Anyway, they weren't going to do the Philippines first. And And MacArthur successfully argued for that. But it's pretty clear that that was all about, his biography. He had said to the Philippine people, I will return.
Right.
This was his stage. This was where he could be a hero. I mean, you also see just how much of it is about that, including important strategic decisions made by admirals and generals who were just making decisions more likely to get them promoted if they worked out. Anyway.
Who is the modern equivalent? I keep thinking of Petraeus because people hated working for him. He doesn't have a reputation as an asshole, but he has a reputation for being very hard on his staff. And he was very famous, yet he was thrown away like a piece of tissue paper by Obama. Never really rose to much prominence. And it's like he was America's best generals were basically all fired by Obama, and yet they just weren't as big. That killed them off.
Well, McChrystal
and Petraeus.
Yeah, McChrystal didn't have a really high profile before it happened. Petraeus did, but on the other hand, he fucked up big time. I mean, at that point, he was already head of the CIA, right? And it turned out he put himself in that incredibly compromising position. He had the affair with a subordinate, and I think she actually, as a result, she was a journalist who was in effect, his publicist, but she was technically a journalist, I guess. And I think she actually had access to some classified stuff as a result. I mean, that was a tough one to recover from. But I had heard from a guy here who was a former colonel who taught a military history course here at Princeton. I had heard that, like Petraeus, like if you looked at his uniform, the so-called fruit salad, all the medals on the chest, he said he wore a lot of medals that, a lot of people would say it's just bad form. You're kind of, you get some bullshit medals and you're kind of, it's considered good form to not parade around with all of them, I don't know.
Alive in 65, that medal, yeah.
That kind of thing.
Well, anyway, I mean, there was a conspiracy theory, which is not implausible, that he was sufficiently popular he could have actually run against Obama. Yet he wasn't sufficiently popular that anybody, what percent of the population would remember his name at this point? 10?
Well, I think that affair was a big problem for him. I mean, before that, he could have run, I'm sure. I assume Obama had his reasons to want to get rid of him aside from that, but it was a pretty compromising situation. Also he was married at the time.
The other similar conspiracy is, did Bill Clinton bug Teddy Forsman's plane when he was going out with Lady Di?
God, you're way ahead of me on this.
Well, Forsman was at one point he was like everybody's favorite capitalist. He wasn't in favor of mindless mergers. He was sort of against mindless mergers, and he was a policy wonk, and he was going out with Diana, the late, who was I guess divorced from Charles at that point. And imagine running for president and your first spouse is Diana. Okay. Tough to compete against. So if you're Clinton and you're paranoid, you want to know what's going on. And he thought his plane was bugged, apparently. And I wouldn't put it past Clinton, since Hillary couldn't bug people at Little Rock. Why shouldn't he keep bugging people? So that's a conspiracy theory I like. But the point is, at that level, people are very, very paranoid about, look at Trump and Biden. I mean, he calls up Zelensky and threatens him because he thinks Biden is his main rival. He wants to get him out of there. I mean, it's like very crude and schoolyardy, but that's the way those people think.
It's almost, you could almost get disillusioned if you weren't careful. But I've been very careful.
Did we have any? Well, you need to have an affair with your publicist.
Huh.
I mean, somebody who can get you on the front pages for like 2 minutes until your life falls apart.
I'll work on that. Why don't we both work on that and see who succeeds first?
Were there any reader comments?
There are reader comments.
I've mentioned the one that was very helpful to me about Hooverville.
Last week, prescient commenters asked why we hadn't talked about the Canadian truck convoy. They knew more than we did. Mike said, "Oh, so Canada is so insignificant that even the Freedom Convoy misses your topic list." I wonder if Mike himself might be Canadian. But there were a number of likes. I think there were like 8 likes. The
answer is, I just find the whole mask wars, vax wars. I see both sides of the issue. I find it all boring. I know it's all going to go away when the virus goes away. Every pandemic in history has had this conflict. In San Francisco during the Great Flu, there were anti-mask riots. This ain't anything new. It's completely predictable, and it's just boring. I just don't give a shit about it. I'm sorry. I understand that what you do about the schools is very, very important to a lot of people's lives, and I respect that. And I notice that the polls show the dramatic difference between people who have children and don't have children in terms of how they view the restrictions.
Well, what's the pattern, though? I mean, I thought
the pattern is people with children are 54%. The government has gone too far in restricting our freedoms, and people who don't have children are 50-some% saying, "I welcome the restrictions."
Uh-huh. It's a tough
and
call.
You know that people left and right, if they have kids, they hate the fucking mask requirements and they hate remote learning. And it turned out they were right. I mean, but they're on the left and the right. I mean, they loved Ned Lamont in Connecticut because he's a Democrat who kept the schools up.
Now also, Baba is the name, chimed in, kind of surprised Mickey didn't bring it up, meaning the Canadian convoy, given how tied into right-wing Twitter he is. It really was a lapse on your part, Mickey.
It's a part of right-wing Twitter that I don't care about. I think it's mindless and it'll go away.
You're starting to sound a little defensive on this point, Mickey.
No, you're not getting my point. My point is, I find the right-wing commentary about it not interesting. The whole anti-mask thing, I don't think is interesting.
Little defensive. Okay, so Paul Doyen.
I'm not defensive.
Paul Doyen points out that Paula Deen is the person I was trying to think of, who I said got canceled for admitting that
somebody's at
the door. Oh, this is great TV. Answer it, because you're not even in your.
Okay.
Yeah, anything could happen, folks, because he's not where he normally is. So this is not going to be like his pool boy.
Sorry?
This could, who knows? It could be like a killer. It could be somebody who comes in and kills him.
I think you got the wrong apartment.
Could be a terrorist. Suicide bomb. Could be a suicide bomber. I am on the edge of my seat. See, this is what you're paying for. Will Mickey come back alive? Will he come back in many pieces? Oh, he's back and intact. Hey, Mickey, how did that go?
I can't tell. These people ring the bell, and I think they're trying to deliver something, but they were speaking in such a thick Hispanic accent that I didn't understand what they were saying, and I didn't order anything. So I assume they have the wrong apartment.
Did you share your position on immigration with them?
I was getting to that, and when they left, it was like, I was disappointed. I was hoping I could have some connection. But
so anyway, I had thought that Paula Deen's grave sin was just admitting that she'd once used the N-word. I was reminded that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. There was she and her brother had been sued for racial discrimination. The lawsuit revealed that she'd organized and so on. So I guess I wasn't paying enough attention to the controversy. It's kind of like you and the truckers. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't give a shit. Then suddenly she's canceled, and I only saw the straw that broke the camel's back, and not the whole accumulation of prior straw. There was an accumulation of prior straw. Tim Graubake says, I think Mickey would look badass with a Frank Zappa style mustache. Badass! Exclamation point. Have you thought about that?
I look good with the mustache and the beard. I look terrible with a mustache. I really look unbelievably bad with the mustache. It's like,
I gotta say, I don't see it.
You would run screaming.
I've seen you with a beard. Like, the beard was fine.
It makes Ron Burgundy look like he has gravitas.
I don't know who that is. I know what
Ron
gravitas
Burgundy's. He's the newscaster on Anchorman, which I've never seen, but
I want to see that. You can tell that's a funny movie. Can't you?
Everybody likes it. But he has a mustache.
Sean Gibby says, first of all, you look great, Mickey. I don't know what that's in reference to. I thought that was uncalled for. I don't know why she said that, frankly.
Maybe because I look great.
I think it's a sympathy vote, frankly.
It's a makeup call
Yeah.
for raking me over the coals.
Maybe she means you, even without the Frank Zappa mustache, you look great.
Raking me over the coals for not having read some Southern novelette called "A Good Man Is Hard to Find."
That's a short story by Flannery O'Connor, and it's very powerful.
I take your word for it. It didn't seem like
the key line is something like, "You'd have been a good woman if you'd had a gun pointed at your head your whole life." This comes from the guy who's pointing a gun at her and finally kills her. It's kind of a grim ending. I hope I didn't spoil any plots there.
It didn't sound like a good time.
It's grim, man. Yeah. Shit. She was a serious person, Flannery O'Connor. Charles Goldman says, you two are as confused about race, in quotes, as is Whoopi. Black is not a race any more than Jewish is. Race is purely an invention of racists. Disagree? Then define race. Mickey, do you want to weigh in?
No, I
wisely, Mickey doesn't weigh in and make the distinction between yeah, exactly. He doesn't.
Not my area of expertise.
Wise. Jose Luis Malaquias feels cheated because you said you were going to talk about a strange Portuguese election, but you didn't.
The news there was that the populists were, I think I said that the news was the populists were going to surge, but the last poll I saw that they weren't surging, they were falling back into the pack. So
Robert Lehman says, the greatest show of all time. Thank you, Robert. Each week, my wife asks me what I'm doing. I retort somewhat incredulously, I'm watching Bob and Mickey. She chortles and walks off. The epitome of marital bliss. I think of us, Mickey, as kind of marriage therapists in a certain sense. I think we're, more than we know, we are the glue that are holding marriages together all across America.
I assume people just have us on in the background babbling and while they got on with their lives, but maybe I'm wrong.
Not unrelatedly, Sue Simmons asks, why don't more women like listening to these gents? We are the gents.
This audience is way less male dominated than any audience I've ever had. So,
well, yeah,
usually it's 90-10.
Sue Simmons herself. I mean, we don't know what the audience is, but commentary wise, there's some.
You should be able to know. There's no survey. You can't get stats on that.
Well, if you went down and looked at all the names and made your judgments about what the first names meant, you could. Would you like that project?
How does Twitter gives me stats on males and females? I think, don't they?
Well, Twitter may ask you when you sign up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? Suzette is another example. She has a comment about Finland. We needn't dwell on it, but the point is that Suzette is presumably a woman, right?
Unless she's really Ben Affleck.
How do you spell Affleck?
Affleck.
That's what I thought. Somebody spelled it. I think one of our commenters, maybe Aflack or something.
Maybe they were talking about Affleck.
Maybe it was a play on the insurance company.
I know Ben.
Do you?
No. I did see him once, though, and he has one distinguishing characteristic.
What would that be?
He's much, much bigger than you think he is. He is fucking huge.
Wait, is he one of the guys who did Good Will Hunting?
Yeah. No. He's
not? Fuck. Who are those guys?
That's the other guy.
No, but there's two guys who did Good Will Hunting.
Oh, he co-wrote it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he's the big one. Well, when he appears with the other guy, he looks big. Why would you be surprised that he's big?
Because everybody in Hollywood is supposed to be smaller than they are. The Alan Ladd phenomenon.
The Tom Cruise phenomenon.
And he's exactly the opposite. If he walks through a crowd, he dominates the crowd. It's just like there's no question who the star is.
You ever seen him in the same room with me? It's a different story, I assure you. You know why you haven't? Because you weren't invited to that party, Mickey. That's why you haven't seen us in the same room.
Now that I know that Ben Smith is having lunch with Jeff Zucker at the Core Club, I feel completely excluded by this Core Club, which I didn't even know existed. Why aren't I in the Core Club? There was a time when I would be invited to the Core Club.
What time was that?
Back when I was big, Bob.
You are big, Mickey. It's the Core Clubs that got little.
Actually, that's probably true.
Now, do you think, God forbid that...
I think the Core Club is very exclusive.
God forbid that Ben Smith is going to invite Jeff Zucker to join his media venture. I will abandon.
Oh, he's much too smart for that.
You think?
But it does seem to be possible that Ben Smith's media venture will be a flop.
Now, has he already quit writing his Times column?
Yeah.
So he wasn't for that.
I mean, Ben Smith is very, very talented and would ordinarily put out an entertaining publication. But, he's this idea that nobody is targeting the global elite. Well, there are a lot of people targeting the global elite, right?
Well, who is? The Economist is. Who else?
Financial Times.
Yeah. I don't know.
Financial Times is a big one. Wall Street Journal.
Well, they obviously have something else in mind. And, all these publications evolved from print. And maybe their idea is if you start from cyberspace, you get,
your profit margin is that much higher. It's possible.
Well, no, but just, strategically, you just do things differently. Probably more than we realize about what we see online in the New York Times, for example, is kind of a, vestigial. And isn't the way you would do things if you were starting out in this environment. I don't know.
Supposedly the publication that started it afresh and didn't have to be troubled by any of these legacy conventions was The Week. Is The Week so special? Is The Week taking the world by storm?
Wait, there is a physical week. There was a physical week.
Okay.
I think it started as a physical.
I think it still exists.
I think it's roughly the opposite of what you are depicting it as, Mickey. But aside from that, your point is well taken.
The whole thing was we're not like Newsweek and Time, which are bound by these, old reporting conventions. We can just sort of rip people off right and left, and we can be The Week.
Well, I think it did. Yeah, I think it did. I don't know enough about the history of The Week. I will say this. I said I'd talk about it, so I will. I got to say I was impressed by my my Tom Friedman conversation.
I bailed out after 20 minutes.
I'm the Friedman whisperer. Did you get to the part where he said, look, this guy is actually influential in the foreign policy discourse. What he says matters. He had said, fuck Putin, let's don't talk to him. I wrote a piece in my newsletter criticizing for that. We came on my show to talk about it, and he said, I've changed my mind. I've reconsidered in light of your criticism. I now think we should offer not to include Ukraine in NATO. That's fucking big. He
said, I take your point. I never understood what I take your point meant. I got in a huge fight once with Jake Tapper because he said, I take your point. And I thought that just meant, I understand your point, but now I'm going to ignore it. Apparently, that's not what it says. It means I agree with your point. Let's talk. Let's move on. But
Mickey,
that's an extraordinarily egomaniacal interpretation of that conversation. He's saying you made a good criticism, and he took it to heart. But I think he said he was for Did he say he was for Finlandization before he got your criticism? I think he was.
I think I have failed to impress upon you how critical I am to world history. So let me just...
He didn't say you convinced him of Finlandization. He said he wrote a column that ignored that, but he thought it.
No,
and you had a valid criticism.
It didn't just ignore it. It flat out... let me find the thing. Blah, 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 turning point, blah, blah, blah. We're getting there. Okay. Here's what he said that I quoted him as saying. He said, I described the way he depicted Putin in these unflattering terms, and I said, kind of makes Putin sound like somebody who can't be reasoned with. And indeed, Friedman is opposed to trying serious diplomacy with him. Then I quote Friedman. He says, quote, in the column, if he wants to come down from the tree in which he's lodged himself, he's going to have to jump or build his own ladder. He has completely contrived this crisis, so there should be no give on our part. He came on my show and said, yes, actually, it probably does make sense to offer to exclude Ukraine from NATO. That is a huge change and was taken as such by people on Twitter who understood the score. And he said he rethought it because of my newsletter. Mickey.
That's the part. I thought he said he had rethought it. And then the causality, I'm not sure of there. But that's okay. You know, history belongs to the victors, Bob. You can print the legend. The legend is. Are
you still
Bob
doubting the truth of what I'm saying here, Mickey? Are you just trolling me or what?
No. I listened to it. I did not get that impression. I would be very flattered if I were you. I did not get the impression that you had changed his mind. Maybe you did. More power to you. But I didn't get that impression that he was admitting that. And why wouldn't he? If he, it would be great sucking up to you if he'd said, "You changed my mind." I don't think he'd have said that.
No, he did. He did. Where do I have this? I'm tempted to. Oh well, never mind. I'll get the quotes and come back at you next week. I'm going to keep hammering away at this until you acknowledge my significance. And I think a person has to ask, Mickey, is the reason you didn't pick this up because there would be something threatening to your ego? Not that it's a fragile ego. I'm not saying it's a fragile ego, although it could be. That would not be inconsistent with what I'm about to say. Is it possible there was something threatening to your fragile fucking ego about my standing astride world history, throwing down thunderbolts wherever the fuck I want and influencing world events as I choose, having legions at my disposal?
I used to be like that, Bob, but now I'm a big, big man and I want you to succeed.
But you don't think I have, Mickey? That hurts.
In part because you write my checks. But
no, you write your own checks. You're bringing in this money. It's rightfully yours.
I was happy that he said that he responded to you because you had good. I had one argument with one, but I had an argument with him once too, Bob.
What did he say? Did he say, Mickey, you changed my mind? I bet he didn't.
No, he changed my mind. He was arguing that Arab states were petrostates were like, he was drawing an analogy to welfare and sort of it producing like a welfare-like culture. And he convinced me. So, no, it was exactly the opposite. But I was amazed that he took the time to write a couple paragraphs to a note, to me. I mean,
that's what I want to know is where does he find the time? I mean, that was my feeling exactly. I mean, I sent him the email as a courtesy, like I criticize you in this newsletter because, I've known him. But then we get into this whole extended thing on email and I'm like, aren't there more important people than me you could be emailing right now? I don't get it. But that's why he's him. He's
him. B, he writes books. If you write books, you need when your book comes out, you want all the friends you can possibly have. And this would be a Marxist vulgar interpretation. And you are the sort of person who could promote a Tom Friedman book, even if you're not a big cheese.
He's not used to exploiting venues like mine for promotion. He's used to
I've seen him at book parties in LA, and he's very nice and charming, and he goes out his way to argue with people for a long time, and that's how he sells his books, or maybe that's why he writes his books. I don't know. But
I don't know. These people who
he's very successful at it. Whatever he's doing must be right.
These people who get 50 times as much stuff done as I get done.
I want to see him and Marty Parrots go at it.
Well,
Marty Parrots' attack on his Israeli book was very entertaining.
Well, there was, he and Marty were both at lunch at the New Republic once, but that was before Marty became disenchanted with him based on, I guess was it From Beirut to Jerusalem that Marty didn't like?
Yeah, that was it.
So we had him to lunch before that book came out, I think. And then Marty was very unhappy with that.
But Marty sort of tends to know what he's talking about. So even if you disagree with his judgments, he has a very detailed knowledge.
Well, they both know a lot of stuff about the Middle East.
Yeah.
I'm here
Marty's
to tell
point
you.
was that he knew more than Friedman.
Well, he probably thought he knew more hard truths, which is the way Tom feels about me. That
you know hard truths?
No, that I don't. That I have a kind of a.
You have this mushy cognitive empathy bullshit.
Mushy cognitive empathy shit. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, Mickey, if you or anybody else thinks of a better term than mushy cognitive empathy shit, which is currently the title of my next book, Mushy Cognitive Empathy Shit.
MCES. It's not even a good acronym. It's not even a good band name.
Actually, it's not a bad band name. Mushy Cognitive Empathy Shit.
The Barbra Streisand Effect is a good band name.
It's not as good as Mushy Cognitive Empathy Shit, if you ask me. Well, Mickey, I think I'm kind of spent.
Okay.
And we've been doing this so long that...
Let's put this out of its misery.
Let's put this fucker to bed.
Let me find the parrot.
Impart the quality. Oh my God, it's 2.5 hours. This is fucking, honestly, if you're still listening, there is a helpline. They should see counseling, right?
I think so.
Yeah, we think so.
I don't, unless they're driving across West Texas.
So could you give them your cell phone number for the counseling? By the way, you weren't thinking of Van Horn, were you, in the regular podcast?
No, this is before Van Horn.
Fuck.
It's between Van Horn and
El Paso?
El Paso, I think, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's Sierra Blanca.
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because I made that. Well, I was mostly very young when I made the drive, but that's just not a.
Okay, hang on. This is exciting.
We're going to get to the bottom of this and make this, because there was still some possibility, someone who's still listening to this out there, we've decided to lay to rest that possibility. Mickey is going to Google. Oh, you doing Google Maps? Let's have a Google Maps duel.
No.
Oh, I'm going to do Google Maps and beat you to the fucking punch. Watch this.
Sierra Blanca.
Where?
Sierra Blanca, Texas is an unincorporated area in Hudspeth County. And is exactly where I said it was. Town is blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's located between Van Horn and El Paso along Interstate 10.
I think it must be almost like a new town.
Do not. No, it's an old town. It's got all sorts of history here. But
who knew?
Always trust content from Kaus Files, Bob.
You know what Van Horn is the capital of now?
I don't know. It's the capital of Bob Wright was wrong town.
No, it's the Jeff Bezos space empire.
Huh.
I mean, I don't know if something happens there. It's either the launches or the headquarters or something. I don't know. Anyway.
I assume that the Elon Musk space launch site is way to the south, right? The whole point is to get as close to the equator as you can.
Yeah, I don't know where those are. We have an Elon Musk item in our newsletter today. You'll be happy to hear. So, Mickey, thank you.
Bob, you have that pompous quality.
Okay, well, thank you, Bird. Now I've got to find a way to shut this off, which when I was young, I was much better at. You want to know why this is hard, Mickey?
You've lost a step.
I've lost more than a step, but that's actually not the reason it's hard. I'll tell you next week. See you next week.
Okay.